Hi, welcome back to my channel. In this video, we are going to look at the forEach method. At the end of the video, we're going to create a to-do list using JavaScript. Okay, first, what is the forEach method? ForEach method is simply a method that loops through an array. And then, you specify whatever it should do for each elements of the. A very good use of the forEach method is one which we are going to look into in a second, which is the to-do list. And how the forEach method helps us in our array is that it is going to manage elements in the array. Each and every element in the array will be specified as the to-do or the task we have to do. And when we delete one, it splice it off the array and then display the rest of the elements in the array. So the forEach method is the best option for this scenario. And that's why I'm going to use the forEach method. Okay, first, let's create the HTML we'll be needing. I'll just create a parent div to contain all my elements, and I'll create two more div. I'll just name the first div inputs because I'm going to have my inputs there. I'll have an input box which will take in my to-do, and pass it to my array, and I'll have a button which will perform the function of adding the to-do to the array. Okay, and I'll create another div, to-do. Now this div I created, it's going to store in all our tasks we have to do. So in it, we are basically going to have the to-do itself. And we will also have some buttons which will help us delete our to-do using JavaScripts. Now in the first div I created, which I give the class of inputs, I'm going to create an input box in there, and I'll give this a placeholder of enter a to-do. So basically, it's going to take in the task we have to do. Next, I'll create a button. I'll just give this a class of add to do, because I'm going to be styling with CSS. And I'll give this a function on click to add to do, and we will define that function in a moment. And then I'll just say add in the button. Okay, now that I have all that done, I'm just going to pause the screen for a second, and I'll quickly style my page. It's up to you to style yours how you want. Okay, so I basically aligned my container to the center. I defined my div of inputs, and I gave that a width. I also style my input box and my button. And then I created an ID, reminder which will style the to-do we are going to create. I can now dive into JavaScript. Okay. First, let's define our input box. And next, we are going to define the div in which all our tasks are going to be stored. And lastly, we'll define our array. I'll call the array lists. Okay, now we are going to create a function. We will name this function add to do as we have defined earlier. And now in this function, the first thing we are going to do is check if our to-do box is empty. Now if it's empty, we're simply going to alert to the user to enter a to-do. Now, how do we check if the to-do box is empty? We are simply going to say if not to-do box.value. And if it's not, we're going to alert to enter a to-do. Okay, so if it's not empty, we can now do what we want. So else, and I'll open my curly brackets. Now we're going to push the value in our input box to our array. Next, we're going to make sure the div that is going to display our to-do is empty, so we will empty it. And next, let's also clear off what we have written in our input box. And lastly, to be sure it adds, let's console.log our array. Okay, let's test that and see how it goes. Okay, now we can add a to-do to our array. Let's display the to-do out in our web page. And this is where the forEach method comes in. So, I'm going to create a function, display to-do. And in it, I'll call in the forEach method. And I'll create an arrow function in the forEach method. Now, the forEach method takes in 3 parameters. The first one is the values itself, the next parameter is the index, and the last parameter is the array. Okay, I'll define my parameters now. I'll call the first one to-do, I'll call the next one I, and the last one which is my array. Okay, now, for each element in the array, let's create a div which will contain all our elements. And let's give an ID of reminders to the div which are specified in our CSS before. And let's give the class name to be the index, so each div has the index of the elements there in the array. And next, we're going to set the inner HTML of the div now. Okay, first we are going to have an h3 element. And in the h3, let's have in our first parameter, which is to-do. So each to-do we enter is going to be rendered in h3. Next let's create a button, and this button is going to help us delete what we want to delete in our tasks. Okay, so how can we make this button able to delete our to-do? This is where we are going to use our splice function. Each element has its index value in the array, and we're going to splice using the index value, and we'll splice just one. And next let's make sure the div which is going to display the to-do is emptied. And last, we'll recall the display to-do function. Next let's add a class to the button, which I already defined in my CSS. Just a default style. And in the button, let's say del. And lastly let's append the div we just created using JavaScript to our div, tasks. And also add the display to do function to our else block. And let's test it out to see. And that's it. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs, and subscribe to get new videos notification. See you in the next video.